The clink of the ring against the plate echoed in the icy silence of the restaurant. They stopped laughing. She, with her pale face and wide eyes, held on to her fork as if it were an anchor to keep it from falling apart. He, the man I hadn't even met until that moment, dropped his cutlery and looked around like a cornered animal. An instant that lasted an eternity. "It's over," my voice came out low but sharp, charged with an anger I didn't know I was capable of carrying. "You want adventure? Have fun. I'm out." Her face transformed, a mixture of shock and despair. "Please, can we talk about this?" she begged, but my response was a steely gaze. "What about him?" He stood up so quickly that he almost knocked over the chair, tripping over himself in his haste to disappear from the scene. Pathetic. Until that moment, I had never considered myself a man of impulsive reactions. I had always been thoughtful, patient. Perhaps too much so. But there, in the center of that grotesque scene, with the curious and incredulous stares of strangers burning my skin, something inside me finally gave way. Months of silent suspicion, sleepless nights next to someone who seemed distant, but who I still loved desperately. It all culminated in that second, like a storm that could no longer be contained. I rewind the events in my mind, looking for the cracks that were now evident, but which I, blinded by routine and trust, refused to see. I remember how she started arriving later, how her cell phone was always face down on the table, how the goodnight kisses started to seem forced, mechanical. "It's just work," she would say, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I wanted to believe it. I wanted to believe it so badly. It was the perfume. An expensive perfume, from a brand I knew she didn't wear. That scent lingered in our bed one night. When I asked her about it, she laughed nervously. "It must be from a colleague at the office, you know how those strong perfumes are." I wanted to confront her right there, but I swallowed it. Again. How many times had I done that? I pushed the thoughts away and convinced myself that I was overreacting. I always thought that love should be made of trust. But that night, something changed. For the first time, I followed her. I'm not proud of it, but it was as if my instinct had finally shouted louder than my reason. She went out for dinner, something about an informal business meeting. She was dressed impeccably, as she hadn't done for ages when she went out with me. My heart began to squeeze before I even started the car. She hadn't gone to the address she'd mentioned. In fact, she wasn't even with her work colleagues. She was with him. I saw them walk into that restaurant, laughing and exchanging glances that should never have existed between her and anyone else. I waited in the car for almost half an hour, the engine still running, trying to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to leave, to pretend I hadn't seen anything. The other, the part that had won, knew there was no turning back. I entered the restaurant. My heart was racing, my hands trembling, but with a strange sense of clarity. I passed tables of couples and friends, each in their own world, oblivious to the hurricane about to explode. When I got to their table, she didn't even see me straight away. She was too busy laughing at something he had said, leaning towards him in an intimate, complicit way. He was holding her hand over the table. The shock on his face when he saw me there was all the confirmation I needed. After I left that restaurant, the adrenaline began to subside, giving way to an immense emptiness. There was no victory at that moment, just a raw, silent pain that seemed to consume every part of me. I drove aimlessly, the streets passing by like blurs, while flashes of our life together flooded my mind. The day we met, the first trip, the promises of a future that now seemed like a cruel joke. How had it come to this? How could she choose to destroy everything we had built? But the worst was yet to come. Deep down, I knew that the betrayal was a symptom, not the cause. I knew that night was just the surface of something deeper, uglier, that was about to emerge. I still didn't know exactly what, but the look on her face as I left the restaurant. It wasn't just guilt. It was fear. And that, more than anything else, stopped me in my tracks. What was she hiding? It was that question that kept me awake that night. It was this doubt that led me to dig into details that I would previously have ignored. And the more I dug, the more I realized that the hole was much deeper than I could ever have imagined. Welcome to the channel where betrayal will never be supported or romanticized. Here, our stories are fictional, but they carry a powerful moral, to show how betrayal can devastate lives, hearts and trust. Get ready to dive into an intense and exciting narrative. Fasten your seatbelts, because today's story will leave you breathless. Happy listening. The soft lights in the living room reflected off the impeccably polished floor, creating a cozy and carefully planned atmosphere. It was a space that looked like something out of a catalog, but with the personal touch of someone who paid attention to detail. Alice loved it. Every piece of furniture, every curtain, even the picture hanging above the sofa was the result of her relentless pursuit of perfection. She always said that the home should be a reflection of the harmony of those who live in it, and so far, it seemed that her theory held true. Next to her, Daniel, her husband of 8 years, was sitting in the armchair with an open book in his hands, but his eyes weren't on the reading. He watched Alice with a slight, almost imperceptible smile as she adjusted a cushion for the third time that evening. He knew her well enough to know that it wasn't about the decoration. It was Alice's way of dealing with worries she couldn't express. Daniel, a pragmatic and observant man, rarely asked unnecessary questions, but saved his doubts for the right moments. Alice, on the other hand, was intense in everything she did. Her energy seemed to infect any environment, even on the most ordinary of days. She was the kind of person who didn't just make an entrance, but dominated the space effortlessly. Her laugh was infectious, and her ability to create quick connections made everyone around her feel important. But in recent months, something seemed to have changed. His laughter came less frequently, and when it did, it no longer had the same sparkle as before. Daniel noticed, but chose to believe that it was just the weight of responsibilities. After all, they both had demanding jobs, chaotic schedules and commitments that never seemed to end. He was an architect, passionate about his profession since his university days. Daniel found beauty in the simplest structures and loved walking around the city, inspired by the contrasts between the old and the modern. He was a soft-spoken man with firm convictions, and his marriage to Alice had been one of his greatest joys so far. He remembered when he first met her, one spring afternoon, at an event where neither of them wanted to be. Alice, with her spontaneity, made a joke about the bland food served at the buffet, eliciting Daniel's first genuine laugh in months. Since then, he couldn't imagine life without her. Alice worked in marketing, a field that demanded creativity and resilience. She was brilliant at her job, always surprising with innovative ideas and leading projects with passion. However, the constant pressure seemed to be taking its toll. She was more distracted, more absorbed in her own thoughts. Daniel tried to address this a few times, but Alice, with her characteristic manner, deflected with a smile or a quick response. "It's okay, I'm just tired," she would say, and Daniel didn't insist. He trusted her, he always had. After all, what could be wrong? Their routine was, in the eyes of any outside observer, enviable. Cozy dinners at home, occasional trips to escape the routine in a relationship that, despite their personality differences, seemed balanced. Friends described them as the perfect couple, the ones who always seemed to have everything under control. But, as in any relationship, there were invisible layers, nuances that only those who lived there could understand. And lately, these nuances had begun to accumulate. Daniel noticed that Alice was spending more time on her cell phone, but never asked about it. He also began to notice how she reacted to incoming messages. A discreet smile, a look away, as if something needed to be hidden. It wasn't the kind of thing Daniel confronted easily. He didn't want to appear paranoid and, deep down, perhaps he feared discovering something he wasn't prepared to face. That night, while they were both getting ready for bed, Alice casually mentioned a work trip she was going on next week. "It's going to be an intense week, but I think it'll be worth it. We need to close this contract, it's important for the company. Daniel nodded, without lifting his eyes from the book. He knew how demanding Alice's work was and admired her dedication. If you need anything, just give me a call, he replied, trying to sound natural. Alice smiled and kissed his forehead. You're always so helpful. Don't worry, everything will be fine. Despite her reassuring words, Daniel felt an uneasiness that he couldn't explain. It was something in the way Alice spoke, as if she was avoiding deeper contact. He tried to push the thoughts away, blaming the accumulated tiredness, but the feeling persisted. While Alice slept beside him, Daniel lay awake for longer than he would have liked, staring at the ceiling and trying to decipher what he was feeling. Alice's trip was exactly as she described it, endless meetings, detailed presentations and short nights of sleep. Or at least that's what she told Daniel the few times she managed to call. He missed her, but knew that it was part of adult life to deal with periods like this. What he didn't know was that week, small events were about to start a chain of changes that he could never have predicted. Back in her routine, Alice seemed livelier, more present, almost like in the early years of their marriage. Daniel, as relieved as he was, sensed that there was something different about her. It wasn't just a renewed spirit, but something more subtle, more difficult to identify. He watched carefully, but avoided mentioning anything. Perhaps it was better not to touch something that seemed to be working. But Alice's behavior wasn't the only thing that had changed. Daniel started getting involved in new projects at work, which made him even busier. He had always believed that keeping one's mind occupied was a way of avoiding unnecessary problems. What's more, focusing on work seemed to alleviate that uncomfortable feeling he felt at home, even if he couldn't name exactly what it was. Their relationship seemed to be entering a new phase, but it wasn't clear whether this change was for the better or worse. There were moments when everything seemed normal, even perfect, but there were also moments of silence that hadn't existed before. A growing space between them, filled with assumptions and doubts that neither of them was willing to verbalize. Alice, for her part, seemed divided. She kept a smile on her face, continued to look after the house with the same zeal, but her thoughts were constantly elsewhere. When she looked at Daniel, she felt a mixture of love and guilt eating away at her. He was a good man, dedicated, patient. Someone who, until recently, she had believed to be her soul mate. So why did she feel like she was trapped in a life that was no longer hers? Daily life went on, and what was hidden between the lines of routine began to take shape, albeit subtly. Daniel felt the weight of something he didn't fully understand, while Alice struggled with thoughts she didn't dare share. It was as if they were both trapped in a silent dance, trying to keep their balance while the ground seemed about to collapse. The days began to unfold with a strange normality in Alice and Daniel's home. It was as if time had decided to pause any significant change. However, what seemed like a tranquil routine hid layers of tension that neither of them could ignore. The comfortable silence that once filled the moments between them now seemed charged with something unspoken, something that hung in the air and created an invisible distance. Daniel immersed himself more and more in his projects, as if work were an anchor for his sanity. He spent long hours in the office, drawing, adjusting details and seeking perfection in his designs. He knew something was wrong, but every attempt to confront Alice about it was met with evasions or answers that, although they seemed convincing, never dispelled his doubts. He preferred silence to the risk of hearing something he wasn't prepared to deal with. Alice, for her part, seemed to have rediscovered an energy that Daniel hadn't seen for a long time. She was more radiant, more attentive to her appearance, more interested in social activities that had previously seemed to bore her. "It's just a phase," she would say casually when Daniel asked about the changes. "I think I'm rediscovering some things about myself." He smiled, but that kind of answer never made him feel entirely comfortable. One evening, while Daniel was going over plans in his office, Alice came in with 2 glasses of wine and sat down next to him. "You work so hard, sometimes it feels like we're not even in the same house." Her voice sounded sweet, but there was a hidden melancholy in her words. Daniel put down his pen and looked at her. I just want to make sure everything is perfect. You know what I'm like. She smiled and touched his hand, but Daniel realized that something about the conversation seemed more rehearsed than spontaneous. Weeks passed, and Daniel began to notice patterns in Alice's behavior. She went out more often, always with a practical explanation, meetings, work events, even visits to friends. But there was one detail he couldn't ignore, her cell phone. Always there, always silent, always turned down. Daniel had never felt the need to look at Alice's cell phone, but now it seemed to carry secrets that he didn't know if he wanted to uncover. One morning, while they were having coffee together, Alice casually mentioned that she was having dinner with an important client that week. Daniel nodded, but something in her tone made his mind race. He tried to look disinterested, but spent the rest of the day with that information echoing in his head. Who was this client? Why did she seem so excited? On the night of the dinner, Alice looked stunning. She wore a dress Daniel hadn't seen in years, carefully applied her makeup and sprayed on a perfume he recognized as one of his favorites. Don't wait up for me, she said with a smile, hurrying off. Daniel stood in the hallway for a moment, trying to shake off the discomfort that was growing inside him. But when the door closed, he felt something change. It was as if a primal instinct had been triggered. He grabbed his coat and car keys and took off after her. He kept a safe distance as he followed her through the illuminated streets. His heart was racing, his hands were sweating on the steering wheel. He felt foolish, even paranoid, but he couldn't stop. When Alice parked in front of a fancy restaurant, Daniel stopped a few blocks away and watched. He expected to see a group of people entering, some formal gathering. But that's not what he saw. She got out of the car, looked around and soon found a man waiting at the entrance. He was tall, well-dressed, and the two exchanged a smile that Daniel recognized. It was a smile of intimacy, of complicity. Then he saw her touch him lightly on the arm, a simple gesture, but loaded with meaning. Daniel felt his stomach turn. He stayed in the car for several minutes, trying to decide what to do. Part of him wanted to go into the restaurant and confront them right there. Another part of him wanted to go home and pretend he hadn't seen anything. But he knew he wouldn't be able to ignore it. He took out his cell phone and snapped a few photos, almost without thinking. He didn't know exactly what he was going to do with them, but he felt he needed to record that moment. It was the confirmation he had been dreading, but which was now before his eyes. When he got home, the night was heavy and the silence seemed deafening. He tried to sleep, but every time he closed his eyes, he saw Alice's face smiling at that man. He felt a crushing weight in his chest, a mixture of anger, sadness, and betrayal. He knew that night marked the end of something, but he still didn't know exactly how to deal with it. The next morning, Alice returned home with the same radiant energy as always, as if nothing had happened. Dinner was great, she said casually as she prepared the coffee. Daniel nodded, trying to control the emotions that were struggling to escape. He watched her every gesture, her every word, looking for some loophole, something to confirm what he already knew. But Alice was careful, even impeccable. If there was guilt in her eyes, she hid it well. Over the next few days, Daniel began to put the pieces of the puzzle together. He revisited past moments, comments made by Alice that he had ignored, signs that now seemed obvious. He began to realize that the hole was deeper than he had imagined. It wasn't just the betrayal that devastated him, but the idea that the whole life he had built with her could have been a lie. One Friday, while Alice was in the shower, Daniel couldn't resist. He grabbed her cell phone and started searching. He didn't have to look very hard. The messages were there, obvious, full of insinuations and promises that he would never have imagined hearing from her. Every word was a stab, every photo a confirmation of what he had seen that night. When Alice came out of the bathroom, she found Daniel sitting on the bed, holding his cell phone. His gaze was empty, but filled with a pain that made her stop in the middle of the room. "Is there something you want to tell me?" The question hung in the air like a sentence. Alice hesitated, and at that moment, Daniel knew there was no turning back. Alice stared at Daniel, the silence between them heavier than any words that could be spoken. He was still holding her cell phone, his fingers tense around it as if it were his last anchor. Her gaze oscillated between confusion and apprehension, as if she knew something was about to explode, but didn't yet know how. Daniel took a deep breath, struggling to contain the maelstrom of emotions that threatened to overflow. "Are you going to tell me?" He finally broke the silence, his voice low but sharp as a blade. Alice took a hesitant step forward, her eyes fixed on his. "Daniel, I can explain." Her voice was a whisper laden with fear and guilt. "Explain what, Alice? Explain how you destroyed everything. Explain what those messages mean. Explain why I had to find out like this." The words came out with a force he could no longer contain. He threw his cell phone on the bed between them. "The evidence is all there. So, yes, please explain." Alice hesitated, tears threatening to fall, but she took a deep breath and tried to pull herself together. "It's not what you think," she began, but the sentence sounded empty, even to her. Daniel laughed, a bitter laugh that seemed to come from a place of sheer emotional exhaustion. "Isn't that what I think? I saw you, Alice. I saw you with him. There's no need to try and save face now." She swallowed dryly, her eyes fixed on the floor. "I made a mistake. It was a mistake, Daniel." He took a step back, as if her words were a physical blow. "A mistake? You called destroying what we've built up over the years a mistake. It's more than a mistake, Alice." Silence filled the room again for a few moments, both standing on opposite sides of an invisible line that neither of them knew how to cross. Alice finally looked up, her voice shaky but determined. "I'm not going to justify what I did, because I know it was wrong. I know I hurt you. But you don't understand what was happening to me, Daniel. I felt alone. Trapped. I don't know how to explain it, but it was as if something in me had been lost, and I didn't know who I was anymore." Daniel interrupted her, his anger beginning to be tinged with a deeper pain. "And you thought the solution to that was to betray me? To look for someone else while I was here, by your side, trusting you?" Alice had no answer to that, at least not one that could ease what he was feeling. "I didn't plan it, Daniel. It happened, and I know I made a mistake, but there's something you need to know." Those words froze Daniel. Was there more? He was already on the edge, and the idea that there was still something hidden was unbearable. "What else, Alice? What else could you have done to destroy our life together?" She hesitated, the words stuck in her throat. But she knew she couldn't hide it any longer. "That man, it wasn't just an affair, Daniel. He was my boss." The revelation hit Daniel like a punch in the gut. He remained silent, trying to process what she had just said. "Your boss?" The incredulity in her voice was palpable. You destroyed our marriage for someone from your work. Someone who, what? Had some kind of power over you?" Alice shook her head, the tears finally streaming down her face. "It wasn't about power. I don't know how to explain it. I got carried away, and it was a mistake, but... Daniel, there's more. He wasn't who he said he was." What she said made Daniel stop. Something in her tone indicated that this revelation was even more devastating than anything he had heard so far. "What do you mean he wasn't who he said he was?" she asked, her voice now lower but charged with tension. Alice took a deep breath before continuing. He was using the job as a front. He's a scammer, Daniel. And I didn't know until it was too late." Daniel blinked, incredulous. "Scammer? Alice, are you telling me that you got involved with someone who was using you? Who destroyed our marriage for a criminal?" She nodded, shame etched into every line of her face. "I only found out recently, and he started blackmailing me. He said that if I tried to leave, he would destroy my reputation, my job. And, Daniel, he knows things about us, things that could harm us. The room fell silent again, but this time it was a heavy, suffocating silence. Daniel felt as if the floor had disappeared beneath his feet. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the fact that the whole situation was much darker and more complicated than he could ever have imagined. So, let me get this straight, he said, his voice now calm, almost cold. You betrayed me. With a criminal. And now he's threatening us. Alice nodded, her tears falling silently. I don't know what to do, Daniel. I got myself into this and I don't see a way out. I need your help. He laughed, a bitter sound that cut through the silence like a knife. My help? After all this, you think I'm going to help you? That I'm going to get involved with the chaos you've brought into our lives? Alice took a desperate step forward. Daniel, I know I don't deserve it, but you're the only person I can trust. Please. I don't know where else to turn. Daniel was silent for a long moment, his thoughts racing in all directions. He still loved her, that was undeniable. But what she had done, what she had allowed to happen, was something he didn't know if he could ever get over. Finally, he sighed, his voice tired. If you want my help, Alice, you'll tell me everything. Without hiding anything. And I want to know exactly what he has against you, against us. Alice nodded, knowing that this was the only way forward. But as she began to speak, Daniel realized that the hole was even deeper than he could have imagined. And, in the back of his mind, he knew that the worst part was yet to come. Daniel crossed his arms, a gesture that mixed frustration and impatience, while Alice stood, visibly frail. The room seemed too small to contain the weight of the conversation. He wanted answers, but at the same time felt a growing fear of what he was about to hear. Start from the beginning, Alice. No beating around the bush. No lies this time. His voice was harsh, cutting. He was trying to maintain control, but every fiber of his being seemed about to crumble. Alice took a deep breath, looking away before she spoke, as if she needed to find the strength to continue. He started to get closer in a subtle way. During meetings, he was always so charismatic and made everyone around him feel special. At first, I thought he was just interested in my ideas, in my work. His voice was shaky, and every word seemed laden with shame. But little by little, he began to involve me in another way. Comments, compliments, invitations to cafes. I was feeling lost at the time, and he seemed to understand exactly where to strike. Daniel interrupted her, his expression laden with incredulity. Are you telling me that he manipulated you? That you just fell for his game like a piece of work? Alice, you're clever. How could you let this happen? She lowered her head, unable to face him. I know I made a mistake, Daniel. I know I should have realized it sooner. But he was good at what he did. And before I knew it, I was already involved. At first, it was just flirting, something that seemed harmless, but it evolved. And when I wanted to leave, he showed me that it wouldn't be that simple. It evolved. Daniel repeated, his voice now lower, but charged with a threatening tension. How far has it gone, Alice? What does he really know about us? She looked up, tears welling, but continued. I thought it was just a discreet affair, something that would never get out. But he had other plans. He started asking me for company information, secrets that I shouldn't share. When I refused, he revealed that he had photos of us, messages, everything documented. He threatened to expose everything, to ruin my career, our reputation. Daniel felt a shiver run down his spine. He wanted to blackmail you. Is that it? And you thought you could hide it from me while you tried to sort it all out yourself? Alice took a step forward, as if trying to reduce the emotional distance between them. I was afraid, Daniel. Afraid of telling you and you hating me forever. Afraid of what he might do to us. I was trying to find a way out of it without involving you, but I couldn't. He's more dangerous than I thought. He's more dangerous than I thought. Daniel put his hands to his face, trying to absorb everything. So not only did you betray me, you put our whole lives in the hands of a scammer. And now you want me to clean up the mess. I'm not asking you to sort everything out yourself, Alice replied, her voice desperate. I just want your help to fix it before he does something worse. He's asking for money now, Daniel. A lot of money. Her words seemed to echo in the air, each syllable carrying a crushing weight. Money, he repeated, almost laughing in disbelief. And what happens if we pay? Do you think he'll just go away? People like that don't stop, Alice. They only increase their demands. She ran her hands through her hair, visibly agitated. I know. I know he can go on. But I don't see any other way out, Daniel. I'm desperate. Daniel began to pace back and forth, the floor creaking under his steps. He needed to think, he needed a solution, but his mind was in chaos. Alice, do you realize how deep you've gotten us into this? This man, he's dangerous. And, worse, he has control over you. Over us. She nodded, the tears now falling freely. I know. But, Daniel, he can't win. I need your strength now. I know I don't deserve it, but, please. Daniel stopped, staring at her deeply. The pain and heartbreak in his eyes were almost palpable. I don't know if I can, Alice. You've destroyed my trust. How can I fight for someone who has broken me? Before she could answer, Alice's cell phone vibrated on the table. They both stared at the device as if it were a bomb about to explode. Daniel grabbed the phone before she could reach it. It was a message from an unknown number, but the signature at the end made it clear who it was. I have what I need to finish you off. I expect payment by tomorrow, or the consequences will be public. Daniel felt his heart racing, anger mixing with fear. He looked at Alice, who seemed petrified. It's him, isn't it? She nodded, unable to say anything. Daniel clenched his fists, his mind working quickly. He knew he needed a plan, and fast. It will stop, Alice. But not the way he wants it to. He lifted his cell phone, showing the message. If he wants to destroy us, then I'll finish him off first. I won't let it destroy what little is left of my life. Alice tried to protest, but Daniel was already on the move. He knew that to beat someone so calculating, he would have to be even more strategic. She followed him, still crying, as he picked up the landline and started making calls. Who are you calling? She asked, her voice filled with panic. Someone who understands this sort of thing, Daniel replied, his voice firm. I may have been taken by surprise, but I'm not going to be defeated. Not by him, and not by this. Alice watched as Daniel organized his thoughts and actions with a determination she hadn't seen for a long time. It was as if, in the midst of the chaos, he had found renewed strength, even if that strength came from anger and disappointment. But as Daniel mounted his counterattack, Alice knew that this was only the beginning. The man she had become involved with was not someone who would give up easily. And, deep down, she feared that what was to come could be even more devastating than everything they had faced so far. Daniel felt the weight of his decision as the phone rang for the third time. The voice on the other end was firm but friendly, belonging to an old colleague from their university days. Although they had never been very close, Daniel knew he had connections and a reputation for knowing how to deal with complicated situations. He explained the basics, omitting embarrassing details but making it clear that he was dealing with someone dangerous and in need of guidance. You know this can get out of hand quickly, don't you? Said the voice over the phone. These guys never operate alone. If he's blackmailing you, he probably already has a plan for every possible reaction from you. I understand. But I need a way to turn the tables before he destroys everything, Daniel replied, trying to stay calm. After a long pause, his friend gave an answer that seemed to carry a weight of its own. I can refer you to someone who can help. But you need to be prepared. This person won't act as your conscience. If you want results, you'll have to accept the consequences. Daniel hung up the phone with a mixture of relief and apprehension. He knew he was crossing a line that he might not be able to undo, but he felt it was his only option. He didn't trust Alice, how could he after everything? But he knew that if he didn't do something, that man would control their lives forever. Alice, sitting on the sofa, watched him in silence. Her eyes were red from crying, but she didn't dare interfere. When Daniel finally sat down in front of her, he didn't say anything for a long time. He just looked at her, as if trying to decipher something that still didn't make sense. He knows your every move, Alice. Every detail of your life. It doesn't happen by chance. How did he get so deep? His voice was firm, but there was no anger, just a cold, calculated curiosity. Alice hesitated before answering. I trusted him more than I should have. He was persuasive. At first, he asked questions that seemed harmless, about me, about us. And then he started collecting everything. Photos, messages, he even accessed confidential documents from my work. I didn't realize how far he'd gone until it was too late. Daniel shook his head in disbelief. So not only did you destroy our trust, but you handed over enough information for this man to manipulate every aspect of our lives. How could you not realize that you were dealing with a predator? Alice lowered her eyes, his words piercing like knives. I was blind, Daniel. I know I made a mistake, but now we need to find a way to fix it. I can't do it alone. He sighed deeply, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. I'll sort it out. But don't think for a second that it's for you. I'm doing this to protect what little is left of my life. And you're going to tell me everything, every detail, every message. If you hide anything again, I'll walk out the door and let you deal with it alone. Alice nodded quickly, her voice almost inaudible. I understand. As the night wore on, Daniel began to gather all the information he could. He reviewed Alice's cell phone messages, wrote down numbers and recorded every detail that could be useful. The tension in the room was almost unbearable, but he didn't stop. With each new discovery, the complexity of the situation became clearer. The man, who Alice only called Victor, wasn't just a scammer. He had connections to larger networks, using his position at work to extort information from other employees. Alice wasn't his first victim. As Daniel worked, Alice watched in silence, fighting the overwhelming wave of guilt that threatened to suffocate her. She knew that Daniel no longer trusted her, and the idea that he was risking everything to make amends for his mistakes made her feel even smaller. But at the same time, she knew she had to face him honestly if there was any hope of redemption. Finally, around midnight, Daniel got up and took the car keys. Alice watched him with a mixture of fear and curiosity. Where are you going? She asked, her voice hesitant. To find someone who can help us, he replied without emotion. You stay here. Don't do anything that could make the situation worse. Alice nodded, but her heart was racing. She knew that Daniel was dealing with something bigger than they could both control, and the fear of what this could mean was growing inside her. Daniel drove through the city, the lights passing like blurs as he went over everything in his head. The address his contact had sent led him to a discreet area, where a middle-aged man was waiting for him. They exchanged a few words, and Daniel handed over the documents and information he had gathered. The man went through everything carefully, asking pointed questions, but never offering more than was necessary. You're lucky you acted quickly, the man finally said. These kind of people don't mess around. But if you're willing to risk it, I can find a way to neutralize them. Only you have to understand, this could have consequences beyond your control. Daniel nodded, his determination clear. I don't care about the consequences. I just want my life back. When Daniel returned home, Alice was waiting in the living room, unable to sleep. He came in without saying anything, but she could tell by his countenance that something had changed. He seemed more focused, more determined, but also more distant. "Did you get anything?" she asked cautiously. "I've come up with a plan," he replied, taking a seat in the armchair. "Now we have to wait." The word "wait" sounded like a sentence to both of them. Silence filled the room again, everyone lost in their own thoughts. Alice wanted to ask more, but knew that her position was delicate. She didn't want to pressure Daniel, not after everything he had already done. But as the night dragged on, one question remained in Daniel's mind. Even if they managed to defeat Victor, what would be left? Their relationship was already in ruins, and he wasn't sure if it was possible to rebuild what had been lost. The moral dilemma deepened with each passing moment. How far was he willing to go for someone who had betrayed him so deeply? As they waited for the plan to unfold, they both knew they were walking a tightrope. And deep down, they each feared that, even if they won the battle against Victor, there would still be bigger battles between them, battles that perhaps neither of them was prepared to face. The first light of morning filtered through the windows as Daniel sat motionless in his armchair. His mind was spinning with the possibilities, the risks he had taken and the consequences that, he knew, were to come. Alice, on the other side of the room, watched him in silence, her expression filled with overwhelming guilt. She wanted to speak, she wanted to apologize once again, but she knew that any words would be insufficient. He had done what he could to stand up to Victor, but what came next was uncharted territory. When Daniel's phone vibrated on the table next to them, they both held their breath. He picked it up calmly, but his gaze didn't hide his tension. The message was short: "The problem has been solved. He won't bother you again." There were no details, no explanation of how it had happened. Just confirmation that the nightmare, at least for the time being, seemed to have come to an end. Daniel read the message again, trying to absorb what it meant. Alice finally approached, her hands trembling as she clung to any shred of hope. "Is it over?" she asked, her voice almost inaudible. Daniel looked at her, his expression indecipherable. "It seems so. But it doesn't mean that everything is all right." She nodded, knowing he was right. Even if Victor was out of the picture, the scars of what had happened would remain. Daniel stood up slowly, running his hands over his face as he tried to organize his thoughts. "I need some time, Alice. From us. From all of this." His voice was firm, but there was no anger. It was just exhaustion. Alice started to cry, but she didn't try to stop him. "I understand," she murmured, her voice broken. "You deserve this time. I hope that one day you'll be able to forgive me." He stared at her for a moment, his eyes tired but sincere. "I don't know if I can, Alice. What you did changed everything. But for now, we need distance. I need to rediscover who I am without all this weighing on me." With those words, he left, leaving her alone in the room. The closed door behind him sounded like an end, but also like the start of something new. Alice sat on the sofa, hugging her knees as she processed the emptiness that now occupied the space between them. The next few days were marked by silence and reflection. Daniel rented a small apartment and began to rebuild his life little by little. He immersed himself in work, but this time not as a form of escape. Each project he completed was like a brick in the reconstruction of his identity, something he knew needed to be solid before anything else. Alice, on the other hand, faced the consequences of her actions alone. She knew she couldn't blame Daniel for leaving. She knew she deserved that loneliness, but that didn't make the nights any less difficult. In an effort to regain some dignity, she decided to walk away from the job where it all began. She began to seek therapy, determined to understand the reasons for her choices and, perhaps, find a way to forgive herself. Months passed, and their lives took different turns. Daniel found a new purpose by dedicating his time to a community project to revitalize degraded areas. He began to meet new people, to connect with other stories that didn't involve pain and betrayal. It was on one of these occasions that he met Julia, a photographer who was also taking part in the project. She had a light but non-invasive energy, and over time, the two of them began to build something that, although in its infancy, seemed promising. Alice, for her part, continued her journey of self-discovery. She no longer sought the external approval that had previously defined her. Instead, she dedicated herself to volunteering, helping women in situations of abuse and vulnerability. There was something therapeutic about listening to other people's stories, offering support and, in some way, redeeming her own choices. One day, Daniel received a letter from Alice. She wasn't asking for forgiveness or trying to justify anything. It was a letter of gratitude, thanking him for everything he had been to her, even if she had destroyed what they had. She wanted him to find happiness, even if it wasn't with her. Daniel read the letter several times before putting it away in a drawer. He didn't reply, but something inside him felt a small but important sense of closure. The man who had tried to destroy their lives, Victor, was completely gone. Daniel never wanted to know the details of how it happened, and perhaps that was for the best. He knew he had risked a lot by dealing with someone so dangerous, but he had no regrets about fighting to protect what was still possible. Time, as always, took its course. For Daniel and Alice, it brought acceptance and, eventually, peace. Although they never crossed paths again, they both learned that pain can be an opportunity for growth, as long as there is a willingness to face it head-on. And so, the end of that story brought something that perhaps neither of them had expected, the chance for a new beginning. Now that the story has come to an end, we want to know what you thought. Comment your opinion, share your thoughts on the characters and their decisions. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow more stories like this one. Here, we believe that betrayal is never the answer, and our stories serve as a reminder that wrong choices can have devastating consequences. See you next time.